Hello there, you're listening to the Part of the Plan podcast. This podcast has been brought to you by Junior Art Lab. This podcast contains descriptions and themes that may be disturbing to some viewers. Your discretion is advised. When she became a judge, it was in an effort to help society, but after years on the job, Liz is getting tired. It doesn't help that there have been disappearances left, right, and center without any traces of a perpetrator.
Mr. Acosta, the jury has found you guilty of murder. You have been sentenced to life in prison without parole, Liz, the judge announced sternly. The jury fell silent as the judge's sentencing dawned on them. They turned to look at Mr. Acosta to see him starting to panic. He turned to the jury, begging with his eyes for them to say he's innocent. "Wait, please, I didn't do it!" The room filled with Mr. Acosta's screams. "Please, just look over my case one more time." The jury could feel the pain and helplessness in his voice. The judge's face remained stone cold. "The law has spoken, Mr. Acosta. Please remain silent," said Liz calmly. Mr. Acosta left the room with 2 police officers trailing him. "The session has been adjourned. Please leave the courtroom," said Liz, addressing the court. The jury and lawyers shuffled out of the courtroom, leaving the judge alone. She left through a back door in the courtroom leading to her office. Liz collapsed in her office chair, breathing a sigh of exhaustion. She closed her eyes and tilted her head up to the ceiling while closing her hands together. "Hello," said Liz, standing up and straightening her judge's gown. "Hello, Your Honor. It's Alexandra, your new secretary. May I come in?" said the new secretary. "What happened to Nicole?" asked Liz as she walked across the room, opening the door. The secretary was a plump woman, maybe only about 5'2" at most, and was quite tense. "She was let go," said Alexandria. Liz looked visibly miffed. She had been with Nicole for over 5 years now, and she just started to like her. "Now then," Alexandra said as she flipped open a book full of photos of those awaiting trial. She flipped to a page containing the profile of a woman. "You're scheduled for the next week to be in charge of the case for Mrs. Bailey," said Alexandra, shutting the book closed. "Should I leave the file to you?" asked Alexandra. "Sure, I'll take a look at them before Monday." Alexandra left the room, shutting the door behind her. Liz pinched the bridge of her nose in annoyance as she slouched back in her chair. Packing up her stuff, Liz noticed that it was starting to drizzle rain outside. "That's not too good," she thought to herself. Liz grabbed an umbrella on her way out of the court and to her car. When she finally reached her car, the rain had developed into a downpour. She opened her car door, throwing her red umbrella into the back seat. As she started her drive home, she turned on the radio. "This is just in," said the newscaster. "We have received word from the police bureau that their own police chief has been pronounced missing." Liz was surprised at this news. Why would the police chief be missing? She leaned forward in her chair slightly as the newscaster continued talking. "The chief was found missing when he was supposed to arrive at a city council meeting this morning. When the deputy and a squad of policemen went to his house, they found his door broken down and the police chief nowhere to be seen." "Christ," Liz said to herself while looking at her windshield. It was starting to hail. She turned down the radio, tuning out the newscaster as she approached her apartment on the rapidly darkening streets. She parked her car on the side of the road, turning the engine off and grabbing her umbrella. She ran up to her apartment door, accidentally stepping into a puddle and soaking her foot along the way. She took out her keys from her back pocket, opening the door and shaking her umbrella. She stepped into the building and walked into the elevator. She clicked the up button and waited for the elevator to pick her up. When the elevator finally reached the lobby, she stepped in, seeing a man already in the elevator. "13th floor, please," said Liz to the man, who reached over to press the button. As the elevator started ascending, Liz took a closer look at the man. She saw he was wearing a dark green coat, which had some holes and cuts in them, and was looking down, so Liz couldn't see his face. "Quite bad weather today," said Liz to the man in an attempt to lessen the awkward silence between them. All she got in return was the creaking of the elevator as it ascended. Liz looked up at the floor number 9. Only 4 more floors until she reached her level. Liz looked back up at the man to see him not there. He had shimmied over closer to her. She looked up at the man's face to see him not looking back. He was wearing a black face mask which covered everything but his eyes, which were looking straight into hers. As she pulled her gaze away from his, having been slightly shook, she saw the elevator doors open. As she went to go leave the elevator, she felt something grab the back of her coat and stop her from moving. She looked around to see what grabbed her and saw the man firmly holding her coat. Her eyes widened as the man pulled out a cloth from his pocket and shoved it in her face, covering her nose and mouth, forcing her to breathe in the noxious fumes emanating from the cloth. She tried screaming, but it was no use as she felt herself pass out. All she saw after that was a blur, with the man grabbing her and her vision getting more and more unfocused until her vision turned black. Liz awoke to come face to face with the metal wall. She felt cold steel touching her side. She felt tapping on her shoulder as she looked over to see a man standing above her. She sat up, looking at the man. "Hello?" she asked confusedly while stretching her neck. "Who are you?" "I'm Sean," said the man. "I'm the head doctor at the hospital. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm feeling okay, if a little sore. Do you know where we are?" "Sorry, but I don't. All I know is that I woke up in a room and some bodies were on the floor." They were both interrupted by the sound of rattling, as she heard shouting coming from behind her. "Help! Please! Let me out of here!" As she turned around, her eyes focused to see a young woman rattling a pair of metal doors as she looked around frantically. Liz looked at Sean in confusion, just to see him looking as confused as her. The woman continued to scream as another person woke up near to her. The dark-haired man sat up, rubbing his eyes as he squinted, looking around the room. As he scanned, he saw Liz, and his eyes narrowed into a scowl. Liz's face morphed into a face of confusion as she wondered why the man was scowling at her. Suddenly, Liz's eyes widened as she realized who the man was. He was Gordon, the chief of the police department. Gordon looked towards the frantic woman as she continued to shout, and he made his way towards her. As he walked, he looked to the corner and saw a tall man approaching him. Gordon quickly shook his head at the tall man, furrowing his brow, unaware that Liz was watching. The tall man slowly stepped back into the corner, and Gordon continued to walk towards the woman. He grabbed the woman's shoulder, and the woman jumped in fear, not hearing him come up behind her. When she turned around, Gordon spoke to her. "Miss, please calm down. I'm part of the police department." The woman started to shout at Gordon. "You're asking me to calm down? I've woken up trapped in a room and the doors to leave are closed." Liz finally stood up and walked to Gordon and the woman. When she got closer to them, Gordon and the woman turned to her. "Well, look," said Gordon in a sarcastic voice. "It's Elizabeth here to help out again." Liz crossed her arms, looking at Gordon unimpressed. "Really, Gordon?" she said while gesturing her arms around. "We're as far as I can see trapped in a room and you're going to bring up a goddamn grudge?" "No," said Gordon, looking angry. "So it's all just a grudge then?" "You know what I meant, Gordon," Liz said. "Yes, I know what you meant," said Gordon, his fist clenched in anger. "Treat this entire thing like it's one godforsaken joke." Gordon was nearly shaking in rage as he looked at Liz. "I'm sorry that he's gone, and it's not my fault he died, and," said Liz, tapering off at the end. "And what?" said Gordon, receiving silence in return. "Well, tell me, what?" said Gordon angrily. "What else were you going to say?" Liz at this point was near glaring at Gordon in frustration and was trying to calm herself down. "Come on, Gordon. We both know that I'm just a judge. I couldn't have helped him even if I tried." Gordon felt his blood boil as he registered what Liz had just said. "You easily could have. You're the highest-ranking judge in the whole city, for God's sake." "And you're the police chief," replied Liz. "Could you do anything?" Gordon felt his blood boil at what Liz had just said, and he raised a fist to hit her. The argument between Gordon and Liz was put to a halt as the woman finally opened the door she had been banging on. "Yes!" shouted the woman in excitement. "They're open!" As Gordon lowered his fist, he quickly turned towards the woman. "Can you see what's behind them?" he asked. "Yeah, I can," replied the woman. "Are you able to fit through?" asked Gordon suspiciously. "Yeah, I think I just might be able to." She managed to shimmy open the doors a little more, letting Liz see that the room looked pitch black from the outside. "Should I go in?" she asked. "Yeah," replied Gordon quickly. "Tell me what you see in there." The woman proceeded to shimmy her way through the small opening until she made it in. "It's pretty dark," she said. "Though from what I can see, it looks like there's some vents on the ceiling." "Can you see anything else?" asked Gordon. "No, not really," the woman replied as she walked around in the other room. "Yeah," said the woman. "Going to get a little foggy in here." "Foggy?" thought Liz to herself. "That's weird. We're trapped in here. Where'd the fog be coming from?" As Liz pondered that to herself, Gordon was having the same thought process. Suddenly, he started yelling at the woman. "Get out!" he practically screamed as he ran to the doors. "What is it?" asked the woman, coughing as she talked. "That's not fog. It's some sort of gas." As Gordon got to the doors, they suddenly slammed shut right in front of him. On the other side of the door, they could both hear banging as the woman tried to open the doors, but to no avail. As the woman continued to bang on the doors, her banging started to become less and less frequent, and suddenly they heard a thud on the other side of the door, and the banging stopped. About a minute later, the doors unlatched and opened, revealing stray traces of what looked like green gas being sucked up by the vents, and the body of the woman sprawled out on the ground, not moving and not breathing either. Sean, in the meanwhile, had run behind both of them and nearly lunged at the woman's body. He flipped her over and checked for her pulse. "She's dead," he said, looking shocked. As he went to move his hand away from her, he accidentally brushed some of her hair and revealed what appeared to be a tattoo. He looked at it closely. It says, I shouldn't have accepted the money. Now I pay the price. The tall man at the corner rubbed the back of his neck and raised his jacket collar, unaware Liz was watching again. As Sean stepped away from the body, Gordon noticed a piece of folded line paper near the doors to the other room. Gordon leaned down to pick up the paper and unfolded it. As he read, Liz saw his eyes widen in shock. "What is it?" she asked, confusedly, as Gordon cleared his throat. "It looks like a set of rules." "What does it say?" asked Liz. "Rule 1, replied Gordon. Each hour, someone in the room must be killed.
Thank you for listening to the Part of the Plan podcast. What does the woman's tattoo mean? Who was the tall man? Will they be able to get out? Find out next time on the Part of the Plan podcast.